Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to the Library Tour of Doom, which is commencing. Even though the library has changed, I like to view all personal book collections as basically my property. And I've been ranging around looking for a Library Tours of Doom, and I found one today, an oddity, something you're only going to find in Mark Richardson's collection. Look at this. Father to Daughter. This is a collection of letters collected by the daughter of the legendary editor Maxwell Perkins, who's a local boy. And this is sort of a matte finish trade paperback that has the feel of an advanced copy, but it has all of his doodles. He's a big doodler. Those of you who have ever seen his collection of professional letters will know that even when he was writing professional advice to any of the authors whose careers he made, he would often, it was a classic case where it was a pause for a minute to figure out what he wanted. His hand was always doodling something even when he was pausing, so that even his most serious letters sometimes had doodles in them. And this is family letters. And that makes it an odd volume, because the volume of letters by Maxwell Perkins that you want is professional letters. His professional letters are the biography of mid-20th century American literature in ways that I don't know we'll ever see again. I see stuff like this. I'm sure that somewhere in this collection there was a rather famous large collection of his non-family letters, of his professional letters. That's got to be here somewhere, or if not, it's on the list to hunt for. I remember that volume. I want to say that it was edited by, what's his name, Turnbull, who wrote a biography of F. Scott Fitzgerald before Zuccola. Well, one way or another. This is not that volume. This is instead the private side of Maxwell Perkins. And I have never seen this before. I've read a lot of these letters because I've read A. Scott Berg's biography of Maxwell Perkins, and I've read a lot of these letters and I've seen a lot of these doodles because they're talked about in that biography. And in A. Scott Berg's biography, which is probably here as well, we'll be doing a lot on Maxwell Perkins. There's a discussion. He tries to explain, and I bet that an attempt is made to explain in here as well, what exactly was the magic of this particular editor. I'm sure that if you've been nose deep in the bookish scene for a long time, you know that, for instance, Thomas Wolfe's publisher decided that after decades of Look Homeward Angel selling out and being in bookstores and being in school curricula, being recognized as a canonical choice of 20th century literature, they were going to cobble together the non-Maxwell Perkins volume of it and call it Oh Lost, so that you go to the bookstore and there are two versions of Look Homeward Angel. Same thing also with a bunch of other books. The idea being, especially in the 21st century, I'm going to try not to harp on the 21st century. In the 21st century, the idea is that editing is colonization. Editing is colonializing. That an editor like Maxwell Perkins used to take an author and refine what they were. He wasn't just catching misspellings when he was your editor. He was refining what you write. He was seeing the best version of it and bringing it forward, which sometimes meant discarding a lot of what the author had written. There was, to my mind, to my memory, not a single case of an author that didn't go to their grave unbelievably grateful that Maxwell Perkins did that he was willing not to impose his own voice, but to find their voice, which authors can lose track of, when they've got bills to pay and a sports piece to write for a quick $50, they can lose track of the seam of genius that's running through their own work. Perkins never did. He never did that. What he was like as a father, probably affectionate, I have no idea. This will be one of the books that goes missing in this collection. As I find out what he was like as a father. I'm wondering, in a volume like this, I mean, there's no rule that says the Library Tour of Doom has to be a book that I've read, just because the old Library Tour of Doom mostly was. I've done many library tours on my channel. A lot of you have pointed out in the wake of those library tours the extremely high percentage of books in my library tours that are books that I have read. That's absolutely true. Those tend to be the ones I keep. I read a lot and I read fast, so an unread book doesn't stay unread in my collection for very long. But this isn't my collection. So there'll be plenty of stuff that I can just speculate on. This is going to be fascinating. I'm not 100% sure that it will be the best Maxwell Perkins collection. I think the work letter collection, if it's here, or even if it's not, we'll find it. We'll find it. That is the quintessential thing, because there you see authors occasionally fighting with him, occasionally sending him something they thought was brilliant, and he says, well, this page of these 6 is brilliant. The others aren't, and you can do better. Just like we saw the other day in the Library Tour of Doom, Dear Genius, a collection of work-related letters by Ursula Nordstrom, who was for 30 years the preeminent children's editor in American literature, and who's, I won't say single-handedly because there were authors involved, but she was largely responsible for a whole shelf of the children's book classics that that would have looked very different or been unpublishable without her. Every one of her authors did the same thing. They fought her, and then they saw, no, it's not just that if I don't take your advice, I don't get your money. It's that your advice is better than mine. She was a fantastic editor. She saw things in the work and pulled them out. She did not impose herself on the work at all, and neither did Maxwell Perkins. He had an extremely forceful personality, but he didn't do that. He listened carefully for what was there and brought it out. I don't know how much of that there'll be in this, but it'll be worth reading. It'll be interesting to read anyway. But that is your Library Tour of Doom for today. We will be coming back to Maxwell Perkins. I'm sure we'll be encountering books that he very heavily edited, that he edited from good to genius. We'll probably be encountering A. Scott Bird's biography. Probably there's that collection of his professional letters here at some point or other. Who knows? And if not, we'll find them. But in the meantime, I have to wonder at the state of great canonical editors like Ursula Nordstrom or Maxwell Perkins. What happens to them in the 21st century? I have no idea. When you have an author who's all of 23 and who has been told since they were 18 in one MFA program after another that sure, The Risen Jesus is great, but, what about you? If they've been told that for their entire adult life, that every word they write is perfect, and that any criticism of their work is a microaggression, what is a person like that going to do if they encounter the 21st century equivalent of Maxwell Perkins? They won't see reason. They're too wedded to the idea of their limp-wristed wet wash getting onto the bestseller list. They're not going to change any of it, especially not if an editor tells them to. So the day of these kinds of titanic editors, there was him, there was Ursula Nordstrom, there were a whole bunch of other people that are less famous. Their day may be over. It may be. We sometimes when we're driving here, we go past Maxwell Perkins' house. And that house was bought with editing. A normal line editor at his house would not have been able to afford, his publishing house would not have been able to afford that kind of property. He was able to do it because he was a star editor of star people who went on to go into canonical lists, go on to reading lists, get major awards. Are we going to have an editor like that in the 21st century? How could they possibly do that? In order for them to do that, the one basic element of alchemy is that the authors have to admit, I'm not just doing this for your money. Because the author can withdraw the work. In every case of Maxwell Perkins or Ursula Nordstrom or any of these other people, there was, I'm doing this at first because you're writing the paycheck, and then there was, I'm doing this because you are the best editor that God could ever have sent me. Every author ended up thinking that way, even Maurice Sendak. No matter how much you love his children's books, he was no bed of roses to know. Every one of them ended up thinking that way. Who would make that choice? Who would make that mental leap in the 21st century? I don't see it. And I don't think it exists, which I think accounts for how many books I read in the 21st century that have obviously not been edited. Not just not strongly edited like a Maxwell Perkins to make them the best shape possible, but not touched at all by an editor. Infinite Jest was not touched at all by an editor. The endless navel-gazing of Fluvium of Karl Ove Knausgaard was never touched by an editor, unless all the editor did was applaud. There are people who make literary studies out of how often the same odd, Roger Sthatharis word crops up on one page of David Foster Wallace. They make literary essays about the gnomic genius of DFW. because they don't want to face the obvious answer that that's just lazy writing. And the reason it's allowed to happen is because editors were warned off it, or were ridden to exhaustion by a crazy author or an entitled author. If that keeps happening, that would certainly explain. Karl Ove Knausgaard's My Struggle should have been one book. Might even have been partially good. He can occasionally turn out a good paragraph. Some editor somewhere signed on to it being 30 books, in which he single-handedly wins World War I, takes a break, single-handedly wins World War II, does some more navel gazing. One way or another. I think in books like that, or for instance, Robert Jordan, you can see the absence of a Maxwell Perkins. I don't know if that'll stay true. But one or another, that's the library tour of Doom for today. Father to daughter. Never seen this book in a bookstore. Letters from Maxwell Perkins to his family and back. Wonderful. That's it for today. We'll see what we do tomorrow. Maybe a book that I have read tomorrow. In the meantime, I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.